Palak Thakur, Research Associate from Transport and Urban Governance Group of TERI. On behalf of TERI, I would like to thank you all for registering to our webinar on impact of COVID-19 on the auto rickshaw community. The webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes and the speakers will be talking for 10 minutes each, followed by a Q&A. The participants will remain muted throughout the webinar and can write the questions in the chat window. This is the first webinar as part of the webinar series under the Namma Auto Project Fund, project funded by the European Union Switch Asia program. Under the project, TERI, along with project partners, ACRA, NYU, and WARD, has been working for improving the livelihood of auto drivers and enabling the transition to electric auto rickshaws in cities of Bangalore and Chennai. Auto rickshaws are one of the worst affected communities, and this webinar we aim to dwell on these questions, on these pointers. Auto rickshaw sector is one of the worst affected sectors. Even with the ease in the movement in lockdown 3.0, the auto rickshaw sectors are not allowed to ply. How will it impact the mobility pattern within the cities? What will be the impact on the livelihood of the auto rickshaw community and other captive users? Will this lead to an increase in the share of private modes? What could be the possible measures addressing the policy interventions, vehicle design, operational models could be adopted by the community policy makers, transport department and the auto unions? How will the lockdown impact on the electrification of the sector? So to start with, I would like to invite our moderator for the webinar, Mr. Shri Prakash, Distinguished Fellow Transport and Urban Governance TERI. Mr. Prakash joined TERI in July 2011 as Distinguished Fellow after a long distinguished service in Indian Railways, where he retired as a Member Secretary Railway Board to Government of India. He is also a professor to TERI SAS. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Palak. Palak, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Going on.
Okay. Now the other speakers along with me are Mrs. Manju Menon. Manju Menon is the project manager of the Switch Asia program, which is undergoing for last 4 years, and they have done a wonderful work in Bangalore as well as Chennai. And she's from ACRA. And this project is Namma project is being funded, as Palak mentioned, by the European Union, Switch Asia, and it is basically consortium led by ACRA and INVI, TERI, and WHAD, that they are all part of this. Now we also have here the Mr. Ravi Gadepalli, who is the urban transport consultant. And Ravi has a long experience, and in fact, he is working very, very closely and is some kind of very serious researcher on the transport. And we also have the Mr. Cedrick, Neba, Tandong. He is CEO of the Three Wheels United and associated with the InView. And actually, he has been working very closely with the auto rickshaw community. And he knows by now that what is their problems, how are they are looking into, what kind of the livelihood issues are there. He is that kind of expert. So these are the young researchers who have spent a lot of time on the working among the community. And I'm sure that today you will be hearing some new ideas, some new thoughts that what should be done, which in fact have been impacted by this COVID-19, particularly as Palak mentioned that it has some kind of a disastrous impact on the auto rickshaw community. Now I will start with Manju Menon, or should we start from Ravi? Okay, I will start from Ravi. Ravi will give a general overview of the urban transport and the role of the auto rickshaw, etc. Ravi, these some of the questions which I would like to pose before you start is that how do you see in general, the impact of COVID-19 on the auto rickshaws, and also, on the travelers, because travelers would be very scared in traveling in the auto rickshaw now because of the safety distance regulations, and also that because the auto rickshaw is a very important mode of the conveyance in the cities, particularly in the Indian cities, then what would be the impact on the city government policies which would ensure that the auto rickshaws keep on moving as it is. And you can also look into that whether there is going to be some kind of a mobility change in the mobility pattern of the cities. And now with this, Ravi, I request you to please start your comments.
Yes, thank you, sir. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate TERI on organizing such an important webinar. It's a very important topic for sure, and also thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic. This has been a topic of interest for me for a few years now, like you mentioned. So I have a few slides here which try to cover the points that you already highlighted. So maybe I'll go through the slides and then come back to any additional points that I missed out. So firstly, I'd like to start by emphasizing on why this is such an important sector to talk about. So firstly, auto rickshaws, also called as intermediate public transport or paratransit services, so they are a very crucial part of our mobility ecosystem in our cities, in our suburban areas, in our rural areas. Wherever you go across the country, they are definitely there. You may not find formal public transport in most places, but you'll always find a IPT or a paratransit form. It may be a three-wheeled auto rickshaw, or it may take some other form in some other places. So it's estimated that there are about 70 lakhs or 7 million of these across India, and around 200 million trips daily. So just to give you a scale, so this is 3 times what the buses carry across the country, and almost 9 times the trips carried by Indian Railways also. So that's the level of mobility services they provide across the country. And their role changes, so it's not a uniform role they play across the country. So in different sizes of cities, their role changes. So in the larger cities, like the metropolitan cities, they act more as a point-to-point service, providing feeder to the formal public transport. In the medium-sized cities, they are almost catering to as many services as the buses. And in the smaller cities and suburban and rural areas, they are the only form of public transport we have. So from the people's access to mobility point of view, they are a very crucial sector to talk about. And in terms of the absolute numbers also, the chart below shows the ones in yellow are the volume of paratransit per lakh people in multiple cities. So just from the volume, you'll see the livelihood impact that the sector also has. So many people are actually dependent on the sector as operators, as mechanics, and the whole supply chain. So if you go to the next slide. So when we talk about the impact of COVID on the sector, I'd like to see it in 3 different buckets. One is the impact on the operators. They are the first impacted because unless they don't provide the service, we don't have anything. The next is the users which use the services. And finally, the regulators who manage or facilitate these services. And the impact, I'd like to put it in 3 buckets again. So the impact during the lockdown, and then the recovery period post-lockdown, and eventually to the new normal, as people are calling it, or once we go back beyond the lockdown period, how will they operate? Firstly, on the operators itself, the ban on operations has severely impacted their livelihoods, that's for sure. 1.5 months without any income and pending EMIs is a really bad deal, and so they are definitely in a lot of distress. And even during the phase out of the lockdown as we have right now, they have only limited operations. They are only allowed in the green zones, and so majority of the operators are still not providing services, and so they continue to face the financial distress. And even post the recovery period, and when we go back to the new normal, as people are calling it, the financial sustainability of these operators will be the most crucial part. We should ensure that they remain on routes because of the reasons I just mentioned earlier on how important they are to the mobility ecosystem. And then at the same time, we also need to make sure that these vehicles are safe to travel, and the measures are needed to have all the COVID norms, as we're calling them, like physical distancing, sanitization, masks, that kind of thing. And on the users, the impact has been that during the lockdown, the economic activity itself was limited, but even to access essential services, people who didn't have vehicles could not access these services because of the lack of three-wheelers. And then during the recovery period as well, only a few people have access, like I said, in the green zones. And people are also actually scared of using these vehicles for the risk of sharing the vehicle with other people and contacting the virus there. But as we move beyond this, and as there is more confidence in the system, I see that there will be much more demand for the auto rickshaws than what we had previously, largely because firstly, none of us know what is going to be in the future. So this is just my own prediction of what will happen. I am expecting that more people will move from public transport to three-wheelers because that is less crowded, obviously, and so it is likely to be perceived to be more safe, at least for a few months beyond the lockdown period. From the regulator's perspective, during the lockdown and post-lockdown recovery, it's a very simple role they had. But in the new normal, I see that they have a lot of work on their hands. Firstly, to enforce the physical distancing norm that the government of India is proposing, and also to ensure that these vehicles are all safe, well sanitized, and things like that. So given these impacts and given the relevance of the sector, how do we actually move forward on this? So if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is definitely not an exhaustive list. According to me, these are the top priority ideas that we should focus on. There are 3 more experts talking after me, and they have a lot of experience also. I look forward to hearing to them. But this is what I'd like to propose at this stage. So first thing we should make sure is to ensure the safety of the users and the operators both. I would say operators first and then the users. So like I was saying, the norms needed to sanitize the vehicles. Should we do it every day, every hour, or once in 2 weeks, 3 weeks? So those kinds of norms or the standard operating procedures need to be established. So far, that hasn't happened. I think that's the first thing we should do. And then definitely ensuring masks for the operators and also the users who are getting on board the vehicles. I think that's a crucial aspect we should enforce. And also minimizing the contact between operators and the users. Some people are putting up physical barriers between the driver's cabin and where people sit. But at the same time, the cash interaction, most of these auto rickshaw users pay by cash. So even if you have a physical separation, while exchanging cash is going to be a big risk. So I think we should definitely promote QR-based payment methods aggressively across the country. The second thing is on the financial sustainability of operators. So in Delhi and Karnataka, there has always been a one-time transfer, which was okay for 1 month, but going forward to sustain their operations, it's very important to tackle their loans. I'm sure Cedrick will talk about that also, but at this point, what I would like to highlight is that the loan, they are mostly getting loans from microfinance or NBFCs and such organizations where we need to make an effort to restructure their loans so that their financial distress is not also leading to them going out of business altogether, which also means their livelihoods are at risk. And the other thing is to have health insurance to operators because they are also at a high risk of contacting the virus. So we need to find a way to provide insurance to all the operators. And finally, on the governance and regulation, first, the key gap in this area has always been that we have absolutely no data. And except for the vehicle registration, we have no idea where they have been operating, what are the demand patterns, supply patterns. So that has been a key gap. Whereas in the recovery and the new normal, the travel demand itself is uncertain because we are shifting to more working from home in urban areas where possible, limiting educational activities, the face-to-face educational activities where possible. So there's a lot of travel demand change that's going to happen. So in response to that, how do we actually operate these services to still be relevant? So that's something to work on. And the other thing is to, of course, we need to ensure adequate supply to minimize overcrowding. So right now, even the operators are concerned for their own safety. So maybe a form of fixed income for these operators to ensure that they are on the roads, and we need to maximize their supply now to make sure that there are enough number of vehicles. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to enforce the physical distancing norms. And there are also lots of technological options that we can explore to ensure that they are constantly tracked and the service levels are optimized. And finally, it is also likely to happen that the sector consolidates itself because these are all individual small-time operators and the financial distress they are put under. It is likely that there may be larger aggregators emerging out of this current situation. So this is where the governance comes into picture to guide this whole process in a more sustainable and efficient way. So I'd like to pause there and hand it back to Mr. Shri Prakash and come back.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Before I go to Manju, I will just ask a very small question to you, Ravi.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the demand for the auto rickshaws may go up, and it looks like also because there will be the shortage of the public transport because of the occupancy restrictions, and it is very difficult to add the number of buses in a city so soon. And because we have to live in this kind of a situation, some kind of a partial lockdown, maybe for the next 2-3 years, when till we get a reliable vaccination for the disease, for this particular disease. Now, but don't you think that demand itself may come down because of the work from homes, etc., that had been adopted by the many, even the government and private organizations?
Yeah, see, that's an interesting question for sure. And we are still grappling with that question across sectors, not just auto rickshaws, across other sectors as well. Firstly, like I said, this is not a homogeneous sector. Across the country, they play different roles in different areas. And work from home, I would say, is still a luxury of some of the elite, if you look at it from the country's perspective. So majority of the low-income users who use shared auto rickshaws are all still have to go to their workplaces and work, I would assume. So there may be an overall travel demand decrease, but may not be very significant on three-wheelers. That is my take at this point, but I'd like to hear others' thoughts.
Thank you, Ravi. Now I go to Manju. The Manju, as I told you, that she is one of the leading experts on the auto rickshaw. So that Manju, before you say you take your time almost for 10 minutes, because you have got 8 to 10 minutes with you. I would like you to ask you certain questions, like say, for example, that since you are working with the auto rickshaw community, then what do you think that impact on the auto rickshaw community and their own livelihood? That because as of now, they are really must be very bad shape. And in the post COVID-19, how you look at the scenario? And secondly, that whether the regular auto rickshaw users will shift to private modes because of the safety concerns. They may like to go to the two-wheelers and also to some extent bicycles as well, and maybe the cars if they can afford. And whether again this will impact the auto rickshaw industry. And one more thing, Manju, if you can look into how can the auto rickshaw be made a safe travel mode by changing the vehicle design or restricting the number of users? Manju.
Thank you very much, sir. I would, while answering the question, I would probably take it from where Ravi concluded. Ravi actually explained very well in terms of how, as a community, auto rickshaw driver community has been impacted like several other informal sector due to the COVID. And let me also put into context the vulnerabilities of this particular community. So we are speaking about these group of people who earn daily and they spend daily, and their levels of savings, or usually the habit of saving, is relatively found less, and most of them also are not covered with insurance. So coming from this kind of a what do you say a profile, a sudden loss of income had impacted them really badly. And when we did a survey 4 years back, we realized that more than 80% of the drivers, for them, auto driving is a primary occupation. So they do not have any other occupation per se. Some of them have their wives working, but several of them do not have. Several of them have migrated from the nearby districts to Bangalore, and they have been living in rented accommodations in Bangalore. And most of them have taken a loan to buy or own their rickshaws. So this is the context in which the COVID has suddenly come in, and this unexpected event has pushed them into a lot of trouble. And the trouble started even before the lockdown was announced because of the work from home. They actually experienced a loss of income by approximately 60% in the previous week. And that came to almost like nil in the last 40, 50 days. So, so it is worrying for them. They are worried about giving back their, paying their loans and the EMIs of their loans. They are worried about paying their rents. How long can they, ask, excuse from their, landlords for not paying or deferring their rents? They are worried about how to pay for their, the cost of their health and other requirements, because several of them have health issues due to the nature of the work that they are in. So all of these are worrying them, and hence they are found in a very vulnerable state. And hence, whatever support has been flowing to them from different quarters, I think has made a little bit of impact. But then they all are probably eagerly waiting for to come back to their work and earn in a dignified manner. So and what happens in a post-COVID scenario, as you rightly asked, how will the private mode, shifting to private mode, will possibly impact the livelihood of the rickshaw drivers? So invariably, in a scenario like this, it is safe to assume that people would want to take control of things, and they would try and avoid exposure to any sort of infection. And if we go with that logic, several of them are going to use their personal vehicles in all probability and using them for their transport regularly. But still, there are significant number of people in the cities who do not own a vehicle of their own, and may not be possible, and especially women. A lot of women who might find it difficult to commute if they do not have a public transport option available. And in that case, where public, till the time there are physical distancing norms are strictly followed, people may have hesitation to use public transport modes. And I see this as an opportunity for the auto rickshaw drivers to regain their income, the lost income that they have experienced. So, I mean, it is the factor of private mode is definitely there, coming and taking a share of their income is definitely there. But I wouldn't take this as a big risk at this stage. Probably, I think instilling confidence in the customers and the users of the auto rickshaw, and making auto rickshaws a safer mode of transport will probably help solve that particular problem. And I think, from a planning perspective also, it makes a lot of sense that we use these many auto rickshaws, 200,000, 300,000 auto rickshaws that we have in the big cities. We optimally use them in managing the transport needs of the cities, rather than allowing people to use their personal vehicles. So I think a lot of measures have to come into place to instill confidence among the users that they can start using some of these mediums which are available. Now, in terms of how to make things safer, so I think you know there is an element of risk both for the user as well as the service provider when it comes to the post lockdown scenario where they will be taking out their vehicle and restarting their rides. And typically some of these drivers, they work for 8 to 10 hours. They are outside their homes and they are coming in touch with, or they do almost 10 to 12 rides every day, which means on an average minimum of 24 to 30 people they are coming into contact with. So this means that they themselves will be putting their health into risk, and any kind of compromise from their end would put a lot of people into risk as well. So, and therefore taking adequate measures to and in equipping the driver and the auto rickshaw to run as a safe vehicle is a must in this scenario. And let's also understand here that this guy who has already lost his income for almost 2 months now, he cannot afford another episode of income loss. He cannot afford any more healthcare treatment cost. So somewhere down the line, ensuring safety is a crucial element here in the post-lockdown times. And for that, several things could be done. For example, as a part of the project, we are planning to distribute some hygiene kits to a few thousand drivers, which consist of a mask and a hand sanitizer and some sort of a disinfectant that could be sprayed to clean the seats as well as the rods and other things. We are also exploring if the possibility of putting up a division or a transparent sheet or something that can divide the driver's seat from the passenger seat. So, and also creating a positive radio campaign or a mass media campaign in creating awareness about few things like, for example, using a mask every time you travel. This is both for the driver as well as the customer. For example, sanitizing your hands as many times as possible when you are outside, and also trying to shift towards digital payment modes. There are still a lot of drivers who have not taken up digital payments. There are also a significant number of customers who still pay by cash, and paying by cash is a potential risk at this stage. So there are these things that could be promoted, and we are in the process of coming up with communication, encouraging more and more people as much as possible to use digital systems and taking care of their personal safety also. And I'm sure the local government will also come up with some measures to support this entire activity. And I think together, all of these stakeholders could work out solutions in making the rides safer in a city like Bangalore. So that's some of the comments from my side, and I think I already touched upon some aspects related to vehicle design and all. We have seen some interesting pictures from I think from Kolkata and some other places where people have created artificial some sort of a partition between the driver's seat and even the passenger seat, etc. These are things work in progress. I think in India we have seen all of these very very quirky ideas coming up, and people really coming up with some cost-effective ways of dealing with it. But I think creating that awareness and the need is also a need of the hour. So yeah, so with that I would like to conclude my comments. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Manju. Now I go to Cedrick. Now, Cedrick is a financial expert and he has been working among the auto-rickshaw drivers for years. Cedrick, few things which I would like to know, specifically, that what are your ideas? Because it looks like that their income as of now it is zero. That they hardly any income now. And even this would be impacted in the post-COVID period also. And then how do you look at their income in the post-COVID period, and what could be done to improve their income? Because that is the one of the major challenge for everyone. And second is that what do you think that should be the possible relaxations, because they are paying their monthly installments for the loan repayment, and how this existing loan mechanism can be relaxed to provide some relief to them. And finally, that we have been trying to electrify the auto sector, and a lot of work has been done in the Karnataka as well as Tamil Nadu. We try to do that. Then whether there will be any impact on the electrification now? Cedrick?
Thank you very much, sir, and thanks to TERI for organizing this very, I think, very, very useful conversation. And just to join Ravi, to say that I believe the conversation is very useful because auto rickshaws remain a very critical part in the Indian society, not just the transport sector, but all across. Because if you look as well, they are usually underserved communities, mostly transporting other low income, and it's the cheapest mode of transport that exists, even with the presence of the share ride companies and all of that. The auto rickshaw has always been the cheapest mode of transport and possibly would remain the face of India for quite a while. Before I get into answering the questions, I would just again join the other co-panelists to give a bit of a background understanding around the auto rickshaw space, and I would keep it very. I'll keep the conversation really around the financing aspects of it. So if you look at like Ravi said, there are over close to 7 million of these vehicles running on the road. But besides 7 million running on the road, you have on average about 2 drivers using a vehicle. So the real population of auto rickshaw drivers is double the number of vehicles in principle that exist on road. When it comes to the number of vehicles that exist on the road, about 90%, this is a market that is heavily driven by financing. About 90% of these vehicles are financed, even though 50% of the people own their vehicles. But yeah, 90% would be anywhere in a process of have just gotten a loan or are midway in their loan or have completed their loans. All of these drivers are affected by COVID. When like Manju said before the COVID period, as a financier, we already noticed a drop in the income of drivers. My company, Three Wheels United, is set up as a social enterprise. So even though we are there to make drivers own their vehicles, the real mission around why we exist is really to help the drivers, because we have, over the years, close to 10 years, been working with this community. And we understand that if they own their vehicles and stop paying for a rent, they double their daily income. And that is why that's the primary reason why we do it. Further to that, we add on our mission that we only make these drivers own cleaner vehicles. For, again, 2 reasons. Cleaner vehicles, well, I'll talk in the case of electric vehicles, have a low operations cost and a lower total cost of ownership, which means that at the end of the cycle, the driver is making more money. So besides even the pollution angle, which as a middle class person, I believe, okay, we should be fighting against pollution. But for a driver, what is really important is his daily income and his livelihood. So we always make decisions that would ensure that the driver ends up with more money in his hands to feed his family, while we are making the conscious decision behind to, say, finance electric vehicles. To come to how the impact is very clear. So incomes of these drivers dropped from 60% to 0 after, during the lockdown. And even with the opening up, I still believe that for several reasons, which other co-panelists have mentioned, there would still not be, the drivers not 100% of the drivers would be making 100% of the incomes they were making before the lockdown. So I think there'll be a big shift in that. And this means that there is pressure on the driver on all sorts of levels. So one is just the risk of going out, meeting with other people who might or might not have gotten in contact with COVID. Second is the financial pressure that exists of making the minimum amount of money that they require a day. And then the third, of course, is the pressure that they get from a loan, which exists. So if you look from with respect to what actions have been taken, I think just after the lockdown, the government communicated that there should be a relaxation of 3 months of EMIs. What that really impacts, or what that really means, is not a write-off of 3 months. It's basically saying don't collect money for 3 months, and that can be interpreted in a lot of ways. One is it was optional for financiers to take it. So as an organization which has a social mission, we made it compulsory to give it to all of the drivers because there's no rationale trying to collect money from someone who's not making money. His primary interest is not paying a loan, but his primary interest should be around feeding his family and surviving. And that's how we see it. But I also think that there are a million of other financiers out there who might or might not have taken that option. And the first thing which we did as an organization was communicate to drivers, because even though there was a loan holiday for 3 months, it was optional at the request of a driver. So a lot of organizations would still continue to charge an interest rate if you don't write a request to them saying, I want to avail this 3 months. And what happens is that you end up, even after the loan period, after the COVID lockdown, with even a higher amount of money than was already due. And because the government created this communication without creating a subvention for financiers themselves, a lot of financiers have just kept it very quiet as an optional package which a client can take or cannot take. Of course, we did, I think everybody should do it anyway, was go out and make it mandatory for our clients to avail that 3 months loan break. Because it stops the loan. Secondly, it doesn't show that you're defaulting in repayment, which means that your credit history is not a bad credit history. And then third, it allows you to pick up post 3 months when you have maybe some revenue. The next point I want to talk about then is what happens post-COVID. While, okay, the government provided for 3 months, I still think that it is going to be longer than 3 months before people are starting to make a sensible amount of money. It doesn't make sense to just have a relaxation for 3 months. It might make sense to observe on an organization basis to then make a conscious decision to start recovering the money when these drivers are, say, earning some revenue. I think that's my take on that point. So then I will talk about the other points, which is really around how electrification, what's the rationale around electrification and how does that work? Well, I started by saying there are a couple of things happening on the market. There is an understanding that the general price of fuel would go down because people weren't using and the prices of fuel dropped. I think that's a very temporary spike because there wasn't consumption, and once we start consuming, the prices would stay back to normal. Secondly, is we had introduced, for example, BS6, which by default increases the prices of non-electric vehicles. The third aspect is, say, in a state like Karnataka, we have these 30,000 autos which were 2 strokes, which as of April of this year were supposed to be illegal. Of course, the transport department hasn't communicated anything to that regards yet, and I'm sure that it might or might not communicate based on all of the current important subject is how to deal with COVID rather than how to deal with old vehicles on road. But I think for all of these reasons, including the fact that Electric vehicle manufacturers are still bullish on their plans. The government is still bullish on its plans to cut down emissions and to transition into more sustainable transport. I believe that it still makes a lot of sense for more and more drivers to go towards electrification for two reasons. One, for all of the reasons, the market forces which I've spoken about, but more importantly, for the driver's sake. Reason is because one, the total, like I mentioned, the total operating costs of these vehicles are lesser. The total overall cost of ownership are lesser, which means a driver would actually make more money than a driver driving a four-stroke today. Secondly, it's about behavior from consumers. We are in an age where everybody wants to reduce pollution. Everybody wants to reduce their carbon footprint. So I believe more and more people would choose that mode of transport over others, right? And when you have, say, an electric bike comparing with a non-electric auto rickshaw, it's a complete different game from comparing an electric bike with an electric vehicle. And then third is, I think there are more and more incentives from the government to drive these initiatives. And I think it is every time in the year, it's very good for drivers to avail incentives. But if there is any time they should be doing it more than ever, I think it's now. Every driver requires every help they need in this moment. So yeah, to that regard, I think we would advise more drivers to go for electric. We would create more soft loan products and soft approach, because there are multiple aspects on it. There are people who already have a vehicle and have a loan. I think to these sort of people, it's more about soft approach for financiers. Of course, not every financier is the same, but as a financier, what we would do is engage with the drivers more, try to solve their immediate issues. We're connecting drivers, for example, with people distributing food to the driver. Manju mentioned of safety kits, where we will connect these drivers with this opportunity. I think now is the time to show the drivers that it is not just about giving you a loan and collecting money, but really around making sure that you are prepared to drive and able to drive when it is possible. Because if the driver at the end of the day is not driving, nobody ends. Secondly, it is really around making sure that the assets which are available are operational. Manju mentioned a lot around preparing safety kits, communicating safety measures to users. But I think to take it a step forward is also to work with partners, the aggregators, people like Ola, Ubers. They have a whole bunch of cabs on their auto rickshaws on their platforms. If we can negotiate with these people to ensure that these drivers are earning a minimum revenue or something like that, then it pushes the conversation forward, because you ensure that the drivers exist in the tough times, so that after the tough times, they're still there. Because the intention is we want to maintain a critical number of assets on the road. If we allow a lot of drivers choose another profession, then we lose those drivers even after this lockdown is over. And I think for us, that is where our focus is going to be. How can we help these drivers now so that they remain drivers, and then do what they're meant to be doing after the lockdown? Third thing that is being done, and which is, I think, where the transport offices can help, is really, so today you have a lot of delivery vehicles, you have a lot of passenger vehicles, but these vehicles, for very good reasons, these vehicles cannot be used say a goods vehicle cannot be used carrying a passenger vehicle cannot be used for goods. I think we should start looking at a framework where we are not just using one vehicle for one purpose, because the intention should not be putting too many vehicles on the road, but rather to have the vehicles which are already on the road utilized as much as possible. And when these vehicles are utilized, these drivers can make a living, and all of the pressure which is off the system can go down. So I'll end at this point. So these are some of the thoughts that we have today. But I think more importantly is really also around the communication. It's vital that every stakeholder is communicating sees this as an important problem, communicates to the drivers how to mitigate this, but not just communicating to them as one stakeholder in the ecosystem, but also just to say, we are with you. We understand that you're not making money. We are strongly with you because at the end of the day, these drivers are a key part of our ecosystem tomorrow. I would stop there and let other panelists speak on.
Thank you very much. In fact, you spoke from your heart. Yeah.
That's why I'm doing this, sir.
Yes. So we are very fortunate, to have Mr. Shivraj Patil, who is Additional Commissioner of Transport in Government of Karnataka. And rather now, I welcome you, Mr. Patil, on this panel. And also, I would like you to share some of the government's thoughts on the crisis which we are facing in the auto rickshaw sector. So some of your thoughts, initial thoughts on Mr.
Thank
Patil.
you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, as you all know, Government of Karnataka has announced the financial package for those auto rickshaw drivers whose auto rickshaws have been stopped since 45 days, sir. Rightly understanding their financial loss by way of their employment as drivers, the Government of Karnataka Transport Department, now it is distributing 5,000 rupees financial help to those drivers. Can you listen, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We all can hear.
Please go on.
Yeah. Then, sir, as the speakers were pointed out, some safety norms will have to be increased in the vehicle, that is auto rickshaw cab, for protecting the commuters, and some sort of physical barrier between the driver and commuters is need of the hour, that we are thinking of from the department, that how exactly it has to be developed, that physical barrier between the driver and as well as the commuters. The second one and most important is keeping the social distance for the commuters and as well as between the commuters and the driver. And as our Prime Minister has already told, Do Gaz Ki Sutra, that is at least 6 to 8 feet distance between the passengers. That also, and the other day the directive advisory was there from the Government of Karnataka. Our Chief Secretary has issued that 50% of the passengers will only be allowed in the passenger carrying vehicles. So that means auto rickshaw seating capacity is 3+1, sir. Now I think among the commuters, only 2 will be allowed in the auto rickshaw. One sitting on either side of the auto rickshaw back seat. So under these circumstances, the cost will also be looked into that. And as the standard protocols are there, wearing the mask, sanitizing their hands while boarding, and also after deboarding, they will have to go for sanitizing. So all these safety measures we will have to keep when we think of starting of these auto rickshaws for this passenger transport. This is one aspect on the vehicle safety as well as commuter safety. The other things which are pointed out now, as far as loss of their income is concerned, it has got a lot of impact over their, family. And of course, government is also giving a sort of thinking over these issues. This is the thing I wanted to tell you, sir. And as EMIs, even central government, it has given an advisory that if their services are affected, like getting done the work from the RTO office or renewing their documents, giving the process of getting done their documents work in the RTO offices. We have given them the time till 30th June 2020 as the validity period for their even the documents which are expired during this period. This is the facility we expected. But this is one aspect I wanted to share here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patil. We appreciate the actions taken by your government to help the auto sector, auto rickshaw community. And in fact, it is quite timely. And we also appreciate that government has got the competing demands on its resources. It will be difficult, to give a very large help to the sector. We also appreciate that, but whatever the regulatory steps are taken or what assistance is being taken, they are really appreciated. And then we will also keep on giving you suggestions from our side that for your consideration. And the Manju and Sugandha, and Ravi, will be in touch with you. Thank you, Mr. Patil.
Definitely, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. And now you see that we have got a large number of the questions from the audience. And in fact, though we are running out of time, but I intend to take all the questions, And my only request to the panelists would be that be very brief in replying these questions, and particularly because you know that you have already covered many of them, So the first question which is before me is for the Ravi. Ravi, the Professor Sanjay Gupta, and in fact, whatever you said, he also mentioned the same thing. He is on the same wavelength with you that the role of auto rickshaw would increase. And how do you see the role of auto rickshaws in the post-COVID period, particularly in a city like Delhi, where social distancing norms may not be possible in mass transit systems for work trip? Now, along with that, you can also cover, that what could be the assistance which can come from the transport authorities from the city to ease the suffering of the auto rickshaw drivers. Be very brief, Ravi, because we are running out of time and I can take all the questions.
Yeah, social distancing norm, my personal view is that it is impossible to manage. So I think we can keep the norm, but I think it is very, very difficult to manage. It may end up as another source of enforcement, but it is difficult to manage. That is my view. On what RTOs and transport authorities can do, so there are two things that I can think of. One is to waive off the permit fee for a certain period of time, and that will reduce the burden to some extent. But more importantly, finding a way of supporting them. So it is likely that the government of India may come up with some package for the MSME sector, the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Somehow, if three-wheelers can be included into that package, and if auto rickshaw operators can benefit out of the MSME sector allocation that the government of India makes, I think that can help them to some extent.
Okay, thanks, Ravi. Now I come to Manju. Manju, you have also two questions, and one is from Mr. Reed Asi, and he wants to know from you, how do you deal with the auto rickshaw drivers' resistance to change? Because a change itself is a difficult thing to do. So then this is one which you can answer, that because you have spent a lot of time with them. And second is from Mr. Ashfaq Ahmed, how to overcome the social and financial impact of the COVID-19 on the community. And thirdly, we have just got this question, that can the society play a role in supporting the drivers? This is a new aspect, because apart from the government assistance and also from whatever is being done, whether the society can play a role in supporting the drivers. And of course, the government benefits which are welcome for these auto rickshaw drivers, and can also these can be more can be provided. Manju.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and thank you for these questions. I would first answer Mr. Neeth's question. Dealing with auto rickshaws, drivers, resistance to change. So I would begin by saying that, I'm comprehending this question from more perspective of behavioral change. If that was the question. So so let's understand that resistance to change is a very human nature, right? I mean, everybody has certain resistance to change. So I wouldn't really generalize it to the auto rickshaw segment per se, or neither would stereotype them. But I don't see a reason why somebody would not adopt a change, especially in a scenario where they have experienced a prolonged income loss, and possibly when they know that whatever measures are being will be put in place, or norms put in place, will ultimately let them earn more. So but I think the answer lies more in terms of how you communicate it, right? So there are organizations, and responsibility of organization like us is to probably break such myths and try to communicate in a manner that instills trust with these stakeholders, especially the auto rickshaw drivers. And I think, as I would probably borrow from what Cedrick said, that how several organizations can come together and come out with a common message, so that such if it is there, has to be dealt in a very systematic manner now. The question of
Okay, I think we have lost
overcome
connection.
a social
Manju.
and financial impact is actually widening the scope of. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Manju.
Yeah.
There is some interruption, but now you are there. You know that we can hear you now.
Okay, that's great. So, I was answering to the second question in terms of how to overcome the social and financial impact of COVID-19. So, I was mentioning that it's desirable to make sure that income and income earning opportunities are streamlined for auto rickshaw drivers, and that's the most desirable way to make sure that they come out of this this problem. So in the last few days, we have seen a lot being done from a humanitarian perspective in terms of people trying to go out and distributing ration. Even I've heard there are some auto unions who have mobilized money and have been giving it out to the drivers into their accounts. So we have seen a phase of charitable support that has been coming to the picture and supporting people. I think the next phase is going to be a phase which is of empowerment and offering dignified livelihoods to the people. And I think that has to emerge strongly, and that would probably help these drivers to overcome this phase. And here I would also take this opportunity to emphasize on two critical things when we speak about this community. One is that there is a need to inculcate a lot more savings habit among this particular community, because of loss of not having enough saving makes them more vulnerable to an event like COVID income loss. And second is insurance. We have, again, as I mentioned earlier, several of them are not covered with insurance. We under the project have supported several drivers to come under the insurance coverage, but still, there is a limit to which how much we can do. So there need to be sustained efforts in making sure that more drivers are covered under some of the insurance and savings coverage in future, so that they are adequately prepared for any unforeseen events like that of a COVID. And answering to the third question in terms of whether the Namma Auto society can support the drivers, and how they can avail government benefits in the society model. How can they avail benefit from the society, from the government, is still something which we are exploring. But we are hopeful that if there are any possible benefits available under any existing government schemes or the future schemes which will be launched, that is something that we'll definitely be exploring, which is the very purpose of establishing a society like this. And the society is functional, and a good amount of a number of drivers had actually used their savings that they have put in the society during this crisis. So in somewhere down the line, we have been successful in at least supporting few drivers because they had saved and they had even borrowed some money at a very nominal rate during this crisis time. But I think the society need to be strengthened further to take up further responsibilities and creating a wider scope for supporting the drivers for whom this has been created. Thank you.
Thank you, Manju. Now we take the next questions. And next question is from Mr. Narendra Verma. Auto rickshaw drivers pay monthly installments for their loan repayment. With no or decreased income, they find it difficult to repay the loan. How the government can help them? And there is another question from Mr. Srinivas Kauligi. Can the transition to e-autos at this juncture help? Cedrick, you have already answered these questions. Would you like to add something on this?
Just briefly, you mentioned, I've already answered these questions. I think on the first, the government has already given a 3 months loan holiday. I think the role that we play as an organization is that we have to communicate to drivers to opt for this, even from other financiers, because a lot of the drivers know that there is something like that, but really don't know how to go about it. Ravi also mentioned that the government might be coming up with some MSME support programs. Again, the role around there is really how do we make sure that every auto rickshaw gets that, because I think that's usually the biggest problem for auto rickshaw drivers. There is a program, but they don't know what they need to submit, what they have to do to get that. But also then talking about the local program, we just heard the announcement that 5,000 has been allocated to these drivers, and we would also support these drivers in communicating how to get some of those support. I think the question on transitioning to e-autos, well, I mentioned that. I think it's a combination of drivers who own auto rickshaws that are going to go out of commission. I think is the better choice because they make more money, so they should. And of course, it reduces their costs. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, next question for Manju. Manju, you have the questions from Mr. Rajul Vatare. What modifications may be required in auto rickshaw design to maintain segregation of passengers and driver, as well as between the passengers? So segregation of drivers and between passengers, drivers, and as also between the passengers. And one more question, related question, is from Mr. Jujair Kherwala. What modifications are required to maintain social distancing norms in auto rickshaws without affecting the economy of the sector? This, Manju, can you take these questions very briefly?
Yeah, sir, I think a part of this question we answered already. So the idea is that there are already some some experiments going. For example, some in Kolkata, some in Kerala, and in some other foreign countries also, in terms of using some kind of a partition between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. Putting up a plexi, a plastic one, or a translucent seat, or something of that sort. So we are still exploring, and probably there still need to be some research done in terms of how what does it cost and how that can be done, etc., etc. And so that is an area where we will see. I'm hopeful to see a lot of interesting things coming up. So definitely, but that need remains that as much as possible, there should not be any physical connect between the driver and the person sitting at the passenger as much as possible. And with respect to having a partition between two passengers, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I do not have an answer for this because getting down, it's not possible to get down with auto rickshaw from the right side. At least in Bangalore, it is not allowed. So, and it is not considered safe also especially in traffic jams. So we still don't know in terms of how to, really operationalize that bit. But I would probably keep my eyes and ears open for models like this and explore the possibility and feasibility of implementing them in a very, very cost-effective manner with the drivers.
Thank you. Thank you, Manju. Now the next question is for Cedrick, and Cedrick, this is one important aspect, of which Ms. Pranjali Deshpande has raised. Can formalization of IPT sector help them in situation like financial stress? And about the Manju Menon's question, that it has already you answered, that you favored that electric mobility or electrification of the auto rickshaws could continue. And there is one more questions, which you can take is that from Divyanka Dhok. Can the auto rickshaw drivers be hired by the local government for contactless, cashless drivers delivery of the essential items in the red zone? Given that the safety measures for drivers are undertaken and app is proposed, especially for them to be tracked, for them to receive delivery instructions, and when needed, be able to give rights to essential service COVID warriors with app-based payments. Yeah, that's right, because you know that since just to keep them running, moving, can they also be hired for the as a goods vehicles? That goods vehicle, and also particularly for the particular use of say those who are involved in the essential services. Cedrick?
Thanks for the questions. I'll just take the first one very quick. Can formalization of the IPT help in situations like financial stress? I think the formalization has to come in from, the government is already doing a lot. What needs to happen is communication and execution. But when you look at it, it comes down to individual financial institutions to execute, particularly when it comes to vehicle loans, which a lot of these drivers have. When it comes to the rest of just managing their finances, I think, yes, formalization of the would help. Because one, you communicate a clear message, and then you follow up on that message. And if there are any things like subsidies, then there is a clear channel on how to get that. But we're talking here about the auto rickshaw segment. It is quite a large segment. It is not the easiest job to do. We've been trying to do that for years, and we still have a long way to go. Second question around would it take away the focus of electric mobility and mobility plans? I don't think so. I think the manufacturers are still bullish on the electric plans. I think the government is still bullish on its electric plans. COVID would be a situation that slows it down because of the behavioral patterns. People might not want to take up new assets. People might be looking at reducing their financial exposure rather than getting into a new loan. And because of all of these reasons, you might see a slow uptake for electric mobility. But then I think the overall benefits are still more than driving non-electric. So when it comes to electric or non-electric, it would be a bargain. And then the final question is, can the rickshaws be used for other things? I think in the past, we have used them to deliver rations to other drivers and things like that. But I think this is really, this is something which can be formalized by the government because it's a chaotic time. First of all, we have to recognize that. It's easy to give proposals than to actually implement them. But then that said, like I mentioned previously, our intention should be to keep these vehicles as utilized as possible. With that said, we also have to take into account the health of the people who are doing this. So people should be well trained. We should identify drivers who don't have underlying health conditions so that we don't put more drivers at risk. And with that, then yes, we can use these drivers for other things, which are more than just carrying passengers. And of course, you have a lot of the drivers who don't own their assets, but who are still drivers. These drivers can be retrained to, say, drive four-wheelers and deliver goods to other people. They can be driving two-wheelers to deliver other parcels and things like that. So there's a whole lot of things which can be done to facilitate that these drivers come out of this whole situation a little bit better than they are today. And yes, all of this requires payment, interaction with people, and transactions. So they need to be trained appropriately to handle each appropriate situation. That's the end of my answer there.
Thank you, Cedrick. Now the next question is for Ravi. Now, from Mr. Sai Sandeep wants to know how will the funding pattern change for auto rickshaw market post COVID-19? Cedrick has already answered this question, so I'll not bother him now. And there is one more question for Ravi from Ms. Nilabha Rai. How the impact of auto rickshaw community can be measured? And Akanksha has asked this question, which is quite important now, that since the drivers are struggling financially as of now, and even in the post-COVID period, the demand would be highly erratic. Certainly, the demand would not come as it looks like. So it is expected that any fare change policies can come to place. Just to help them, can we increase the fare? What is your view, Ravi?
Yeah, thanks to all the people who asked these questions. Firstly, I'd like to qualify my response for the earlier question on how can we enforce social distancing. So I've given a bit of a defeatist view that no, we can't enforce it, but what we can do is to enforce masks. I think that is the best thing we can do. So social distancing we hope to do, but masks we should definitely aim to implement strictly. On the questions raised here, firstly on the funding pattern itself, Cedrick is the expert on this, but my view is that the funding will definitely slow down for a significant amount of time, because the financials are also badly hit because of all the delay in payments and things like that. So that's why even I think the electrification may take some more time than anticipated earlier. But there is also this talk about having a scrappage policy coming in to accelerate vehicle sales. So if that comes in, we can check. But I expect that the funding will actually come down significantly and the interest rates may go up because of the more defaults that we have seen recently. On the community measure, the impact on the auto rickshaw. Sorry, sir, you were saying something?
No, it's okay. Please continue, Ravi.
Yeah, 2 more minutes. So on the how do we measure? Actually, that's a very important question. Like I was mentioning in my presentation also, there's very limited data we have on their operational characteristics, their income patterns, cost patterns. So I think it's about time we start measuring it. So it's fairly straightforward actually, and the auto rickshaw community in general is a very easy to collaborate kind of community in India. So there are ways to measure it on measuring kilometers operated, passengers carried, income, cost, etc. So how to measure it? There is research available, but more important is, do we have the willingness to measure it? I think that to me is the bigger question, and that's where the transport operators should play a more proactive role rather than just issuing licenses. I think that's the first step to do to measure this. And to Akanksha's question on demand patterns and fare increases, so I think it is likely to come in on its own. As we all know, even though there are fare policies set by the government, auto rickshaws normally are market driven and demand driven. The users think it is coercing sometimes, but that is basically market dynamics. So if there is more demand, they'll charge more. And now that we'll enforce a limited occupancy, and they have been completely kept empty for more than a month, I expect that the fares will go up automatically just by the market themselves. And I don't think government at this point it will also be a politically bad negative thing for the government to increase auto rickshaws fares. My expectation is that the operators will increase them anyway.
Thank you, Ravi. We have the last question from Divya. It has just come, and I thought I'll take this as a last question. And Divya wants to know how much in the post lockdown period, whether the auto sector would boom or dip, and if to what extent. So Divya, I will answer this that it is the mixed feeling, that in some experts feel that it would go up, and some feel that it may down because the demand itself may not be there as it should be there in the normal times. So this is my view, and thank you very much. Have already extended almost for about 15 minutes. Because the 5 o'clock was the that we should have finished at least. And thank you very much for all the panelists and also the to the participants. And they have they continued bearing us for another 15 minutes. And only because that there is a large interest on this particular subject, we thought that we will take all the questions and also we will discuss in detail. Thank you very much. I will not try to summarize because already there's no time. But the auto rickshaw sector is very important for the urban transport. And though the customers have some uneasy relations with the auto rickshaw drivers, particularly, that they have numerous complaints of the overcharging or not following the meter, etc. But at the same time, that they also need the auto rickshaws, and rather it is some kind of a very safe travel, particularly for the women travelers. So that is why this auto rickshaw is going to remain there. And I'm sure that the government would take all kinds of these steps to revive this sector, and not only revive, but also to flourish this sector. Thank you very much, all the panelists as well as the participants. Thank you, Mr. Patel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we close down with a thanks to Palak and Sugandha. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining and sparing some time for our webinar. And we will be sharing the minutes of the webinar with everyone, all the participants and all the speakers. And we will look forward for our next webinar session, which is on future of electric autos. We will inform everyone shortly about the day and the date and the time of the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.